Wrestling might be scripted, but the pain is very real. WWE superstars have taken risks that went horribly wrong, leaving fans wondering how they even survived. From brutal falls to devastating injuries, these moments weren't just scary, they were unforgettable. And speaking of unforgettable, let's start with one injury so insane, it literally changed WWE forever. In 1999, something happened in WWE that no one will ever forget. Owen Hart, a fan-favorite wrestler, was performing a stunt at a live event called Over the Edge. He was supposed to descend from the ceiling wearing a superhero-style harness, but something went horribly wrong. The harness failed and Owen fell over 70 feet into the ring. Tragically, he didn't survive the fall. It shocked everyone, the fans, the wrestlers, and the entire WWE world. This wasn't just an accident. It was a heartbreaking moment that changed how WWE handled safety forever. Fans paid tribute to Owen in the weeks after, and his legacy still lives on today. And speaking of moments that shook WWE, let's look at another incident that left everyone speechless. This one left a wrestler's face shattered. Back in 2006, during WWE's Armageddon event, Joey Mercury found himself in one of the most chaotic and dangerous match types, a fatal four-way ladder match. If you're not familiar, ladder matches are exactly what they sound like. A bunch of wrestlers use ladders as weapons and tools to climb and grab a prize hanging above the ring. They're wild, unpredictable, and full of risky moments. Joey, alongside his tag partner Johnny Nitro, was battling teams like the Hardys when disaster struck. Jeff Hardy smashed a ladder upward, and it swung directly into Joey's face with full force. The impact was devastating. Joey's nose and the bones around his eye were shattered, and blood poured everywhere, shocking everyone watching. He was rushed out of the match and later needed multiple surgeries to repair the damage, leaving him with permanent scars. It remains one of the bloodiest and scariest injuries in WWE history, and while Joey's story was horrifying, our next injury ended not just a match, but an entire career, and it's one of the most tragic moments WWE has ever seen. In 1999, during a match on SmackDown, Droz, whose real name is Darren Drozdov, was facing D'Lo Brown in what seemed like a normal wrestling match. Droz was an up-and-coming star, known for his unique personality and toughness. But then, in a single move, everything changed. D'Lo went to perform a powerbomb, a move where one wrestler lifts another and slams them down onto their back. Something went wrong. Droz couldn't position himself properly because of his loose shirt, and the move didn't land as planned. He hit the mat awkwardly, and the impact left him paralyzed from the neck down. The accident was devastating. Droz's wrestling career ended right there, and he's been in a wheelchair ever since. But despite everything, Droz stayed incredibly positive. He became an inspiration to fans by showing that even after such a life-changing injury, you can keep moving forward. He's been a reminder of just how dangerous wrestling can be and how much these superstars risk every time they step into the ring. And speaking of risks, the next injury didn't just risk a career, it almost cost a wrestler his life. In 1998, during WWE's King of the Ring, Mick Foley, wrestling as Mankind, stepped into the infamous Hell in a Cell match against The Undertaker. Now, Foley was already known for taking crazy risks, but what happened that night went beyond anything fans had ever seen. The match started with both men climbing to the top of the 16-foot steel structure. Moments later, The Undertaker threw Foley off the top of the cell, sending him crashing down onto the announcer's table below. Fans couldn't believe it. He wasn't moving. Somehow, Foley got back up and climbed the cell again, but it didn't stop there. The Undertaker chokeslammed him, and this time, the roof of the cell broke, sending Foley crashing down into the ring. The impact knocked him out cold, dislocating his shoulder and giving him a concussion. Oh, and if that wasn't enough, a tooth ended up stuck in his nose after the fall. It was one of the most brutal matches in WWE history, and Foley's willingness to keep going earned him respect from fans and wrestlers alike. And while Foley's resilience was legendary, our next story is about a moment where sheer luck saved a wrestler from a devastating injury that could have ended his career, or worse. In 2003 at WrestleMania 19, Brock Lesnar, yes, the Beast incarnate, decided to try something way out of his usual power-based style. Brock was in the main event against Kurt Angle, and to make the match even more epic, he went for a high-flying move called the Shooting Star Press. Now, this move is usually done by smaller, more agile wrestlers, not a 280-pound powerhouse like Brock. As he launched himself off the top rope, things went horribly wrong. He didn't rotate far enough, and instead of landing on Kurt, he landed headfirst on the mat. The crowd was stunned. Brock somehow avoided breaking his neck, but he did get a serious concussion. Even more insane, he still finished the match, hitting an F5 on Kurt to win the WWE Championship. This moment is remembered not just for how dangerous it was, but for Brock's sheer toughness to push through it. And while Brock narrowly avoided disaster, The next story is about a moment where a wrestling legend wasn't so lucky, an injury that ended a career and changed WWE forever. In 1999, Bret the Hitman Hart, a living legend in the wrestling world, was in a match against Goldberg at WCW's Starrcade. Now, Bret was one of the best technical wrestlers ever, and this match was supposed to be a big deal. But things went wrong fast. Goldberg threw a kick that was just a little too stiff and caught Bret right in the head. That one kick caused a severe concussion, and back then, wrestling didn't have the strict safety protocols it does today. Bret kept wrestling for a while after, but the damage was done. The concussion eventually forced him to retire for good. It wasn't just the end of Bret's career. It was the end of an era. Fans were devastated, and Bret himself has called this one of the most painful moments of his life, both physically and emotionally. His legacy is still celebrated today, but it's tough not to wonder what could have been if that match had gone differently. And while Bret's story is heartbreaking, our next injury will leave you stunned. It's about a young wrestler who was just starting his journey when a freak accident changed his life forever. In 2015, Tyson Kidd was a rising star in WWE, known for his amazing technical skills and being part of an awesome tag team with Cesaro. But during a routine dark match, one of those matches that happens before the TV cameras roll, his entire career changed in an instant. Tyson was wrestling Samoa Joe, and Joe hit him with his signature move, the Muscle Buster. It's a move where the wrestler lifts their opponent onto their shoulders and drops them onto the mat, but something went horribly wrong. Tyson landed awkwardly, and the impact caused a life-threatening spinal cord injury. Doctors later said that only 5% of people survive this type of injury, and those who do are often left permanently paralyzed. Tyson somehow survived and even regained mobility, but his wrestling career was over. Today, he works behind the scenes in WWE, helping others create amazing matches, and his story serves as a powerful reminder of just how dangerous wrestling can be. And speaking of danger, our next injury takes us to one of the most iconic matches in WWE history, where flames, steel, and a legendary wrestler's sheer willpower created a moment no one will ever forget. In 2010, at the Elimination Chamber event, The Undertaker, one of WWE's most legendary wrestlers, experienced a moment so dangerous it could have been catastrophic. As part of his iconic entrance, Undertaker walked through a wall of fire and smoke, a signature part of his intimidating persona. But this time, something went horribly wrong. A pyrotechnic malfunction caused the flames to hit him directly, burning his chest and parts of his neck. The burns were so bad that he had to pour bottles of water over himself just to cool down before stepping into the match. Here's the crazy part. Despite suffering first and second-degree burns, The Undertaker still wrestled for nearly 40 minutes inside the brutal Elimination Chamber. Talk about tough. Fans didn't realize how serious the injury was until much later, which made the whole thing even more shocking. It's a moment that proves just how much these wrestlers push themselves to entertain the crowd. But if you thought The Undertaker wrestling through burns was tough, this next story isn't about survival. It's about a moment that shocked the entire world and ended in tragedy. In 2015, a tragic moment shook the wrestling world during a match in Mexico involving Rey Mysterio, one of WWE's most beloved high flyers. Rey was teaming with others in a tag match when he set up a move fans know as the 619, a signature move where he swings through the ropes and kicks his opponent. But something unexpected happened. Perro Aguayo Jr., the wrestler on the receiving end, slumped awkwardly onto the ropes and didn't move. At first, no one realized anything was wrong. The match continued for a moment before everyone noticed that Perro wasn't responding. It turned out that Perro had suffered a fatal spinal injury, and he passed away right there in the ring. This wasn't anyone's fault. It was a freak accident caused by the impact of the match. The tragedy left Rey devastated and sent shockwaves through the wrestling community, reminding everyone how real the risks are every time wrestlers step into the ring. And while this story was heartbreakingly tragic, our next injury is about overcoming the odds, winning the biggest match of your life, only for an injury to snatch it all away the very next day. In 2016, Finn Balor was on top of the world. At SummerSlam, he made history by becoming the very first WWE Universal Champion after an epic match against Seth Rollins. But that same night, his dream came crashing down, literally. During the match, Seth threw Finn into the barricade using a move called the Buckle Bomb. Finn landed awkwardly on his shoulder, tearing his labrum. If you're wondering what that means, it's a fancy way of saying his shoulder was wrecked. What's crazy is Finn kept wrestling, even popping his shoulder back into place during the match, and still won. But the next day, doctors told him the bad news. He'd need surgery and months of recovery. Finn had no choice but to give up the Universal Championship less than 24 hours after winning it. Fans were heartbroken, and so was Finn. It was a moment that showed just how brutal and unforgiving wrestling can be. And if you think wrestling through a torn shoulder is tough, this wasn't the only time Seth Rollins gained a reputation for leaving his opponents hurt. The next is a gruesome injury that left a superstar's face shattered, and it all happened during another match with Seth. In 2015, John Cena, WWE's golden boy and one of the toughest guys in the business, stepped into the ring with Seth Rollins on an episode of Raw. It was supposed to be just another hard-hitting match between two of WWE's biggest stars. But things took a brutal turn when Seth hit Cena with a flying knee strike. The knee landed directly on Cena's face, and you could immediately tell something was wrong. His nose was completely smashed. It was bent to the side, and blood was pouring everywhere. Here's the wild part. Cena didn't quit. He kept wrestling, finished the match, and even won. Doctors later confirmed his nose was broken in multiple places, and he needed surgery to fix it. This moment showed just how tough Cena really is, but it also added to Seth Rollins' growing reputation at the time as someone whose matches often left opponents injured. But if you thought a broken nose was bad, our next story is about a wrestler who didn't just suffer an injury. It was so bad, it ended his career for years, and the way it happened will leave you shocked. In 1998, Shawn Michaels, known as HBK and one of the greatest wrestlers ever, stepped into the ring for a casket match against The Undertaker at Royal Rumble. It was a brutal, high-stakes match, but things took a turn for the worst when Shawn was backdropped over the top rope and hit the edge of the casket. His lower back slammed against the casket so hard that it caused a serious spinal injury. At first, Shawn kept going, even finishing the match like nothing happened. But the damage was done. After the match, the pain got worse, and doctors told him he had 2 herniated discs and a crushed one. This injury forced Shawn to retire later that year after WrestleMania 14, leaving fans heartbroken. For years, it seemed like his career was over. But Shawn being Shawn, he didn't give up. 4 years later, he made an epic return to wrestling, proving why he's called the Heartbreak Kid. His comeback story is still one of the best in WWE history. And while Shawn's journey had a happy ending, it's a reminder of just how dangerous wrestling can be, and how moments of real blood and emotion can elevate a story to legendary status. We saw that recently with Drew McIntyre. At WWE Bad Blood 2024, Drew McIntyre and CM Punk went all out in their Hell in a Cell match. Things got crazy when Punk grabbed a metal toolbox and smashed it into Drew's head. The impact left a deep cut and blood started streaming down Drew's face. The crowd was stunned. It was real, and it was brutal. But instead of backing down, Drew kept fighting like a warrior, using the blood and the pain to fuel his performance. That moment turned the match into something unforgettable, showing just how far both men were willing to go to settle their rivalry. And if you thought this match was wild, wait until you see how it all began. From surprise attacks to some of the most heated promos ever, the Drew McIntyre and CM Punk feud is one for the history books. Click on our next video to see the full story. It's a ride you don't want to miss.